Hi everyone, welcome to the MrpTech podcast. This is episode 94. My name is Matt and this is the weekly podcast discussing everyday tech for everyday people. Thanks for tuning in this week. I've got a great show lined up for you, and one of the things that I'd like to do this week is discuss all of the current Ubuntu flavors and give you my thoughts on which one is the most exciting for me. But before we get into that, I got a few things to talk about first. Sorry, there was no last week episode, and the reason for that is I was feeling under the weather. I had a cold all week, and my general rule of thumb is when I'm listening to podcasts that I will not listen to a podcast if someone gets on the air and is just sounds like they have a cold. They're just completely feeling under the weather. Usually I'll just skip over that. So the thought being that if I don't want to listen to myself talk on a podcast, then nobody else does either. So I skipped last week's episode, and I feel badly about that, but I'm feeling better now. And I have a lot of cool things to talk to you about. I've got some really great interviews that I'm going to line up over the next few weeks. I hope to get some good friends who have some really high technical knowledge on a few different things on the air, and sort of as a precursor to inviting anybody else to come on the show and be interviewed as well. So we're setting up sort of behind the scenes so that we can be able to do some episodes. And also, if you haven't listened to the last few episodes, we are gearing up towards episode 100, and still trying to work out the details on some sort of a live show for episode 100. Try to use something like Discord where we could bring in the live chat and that type of thing. Still a few bugs to work out with that, but I'm looking forward to episode 100 coming in just a few weeks now. So let's jump right into everything that I wanted to talk about this week. Originally, I was going to talk about, I was going to compare two Ubuntu flavors. And as I sort of was testing back and forth and testing a couple of different releases of Ubuntu, one of the things that came to mind was all of the Ubuntu flavors that are out there now. Now, when I started using Linux, it was probably back in 2009, I believe. And the very first Linux distribution that I started with was just the core Ubuntu Linux. And Ubuntu itself is based off another Linux operating system called Debian. And basically they take all the good things from Debian and they modify it to be what they want. And that's the beauty of sort of open source software. You can take code from somewhere else, you can improve on it, and make it your own. And the other thing is, this past week, I've been sort of having conversations, off-the-cuff conversations with friends of mine, old students of mine, and sort of just people on random that have approached me and telling me that they're listening to the podcast, and they find it very informative. One of the things that I'd like to do for those people, if they currently aren't using Linux and never have tried Linux before, kind of want to talk to them about a good place to start with Linux, especially if you're not a technical expert or if you've never used Linux before. I think Ubuntu is a good place to start. There are other places that you can start as well. So basically, the great thing about any Ubuntu-based Linux OS is basically it's really easy to get up and running, especially if you have a spare computer lying around, that maybe a laptop that's collecting dust, or you have an old desktop somewhere that you don't use very often, and you're just looking for something new to try, maybe to squeak out a couple more years of life, and then try it out. And if you like it, maybe you don't realize that you don't need something like Windows anymore, and you can stick with the free operating systems that Linux provides. So like I said, I started with Ubuntu, and it's really easy to you just download the disk image. There's software out there like Etcher. You can go to etcher.io, and you can flash that to a flash drive, and you can plug it in your computer, and you can boot right into a Linux live environment. You can test it out before you install it, and if you really want to, you wipe your drive and install Linux on your computer and reap the many benefits of free and open source software. Comes with tons of software pre-installed already. So, okay, this last week, Ubuntu released its latest edition. It's called 18.04, and they do so every 6 months. Now, this edition happens to be a long-term support edition, which will give you support and security upgrades for 5 years. And with that, all of the official Ubuntu flavors have also released their version of Ubuntu as well. What I want to talk to you about is all of the different official Ubuntu flavors, so to speak, out there. Now, Ubuntu itself has made a big change. They used to, and most of these flavors, they're using different desktop environments, different themes, different software packages, and they're each kind of configured in a slightly different way to give users that different edge that they might be looking for. So Ubuntu made a major change this time around, and especially for a long-term support, they've switched from their home-built Unity desktop environment to the GNOME desktop. Now, I think that was a good decision, and that's really only a benefit to Ubuntu at this point in time. And I've talked a lot about the GNOME desktop because I use GNOME quite a bit, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that right now. But let's just jump into some of the official flavors for Ubuntu that have also recently released their 18.04 edition. So I want to start off with Lubuntu. Now, if you have an ancient computer, one with very low specs, Lubuntu might be a way to start on an old device. It's a complete operating system. It ships with essential apps and services, just like Windows or Mac would. And all of these are the software that's pre-installed with it can run on low-spec computers. It's a low and it's a fast and lightweight operating system, which can be used on older devices, or if you just want the, if say you want to do a lot of really intense and powerful software, if you're running intense and powerful software, you might want the operating system to just get out of the way and have more resources available for things like video editing and that type of thing. So Lubuntu is for either older computers, or if you just want a bare bones operating system, very lightweight. It's compatible with many file formats, images, songs, spreadsheets. You can pretty much do anything. It's a fully functional operating system, but it doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles that a more modern and more powerful operating system would have. Going on to the next official flavor, if you're looking for something a little more powerful, you can look into something called Xubuntu, which Xubuntu. Xubuntu uses the XFCE desktop environment, which is still great for low-spec computers. XFCE has been around forever. It's stable, it's light, and it can be configurable if you spend enough time with it. And if you're looking for something you want to get the most out of your desktop, you want that modern look, but you also want efficiency from your computer, especially with older hardware. Xubuntu is a good good place to start, and the XFCE desktop is something that many people use out there. Many people love XFCE, and the system requirements for Xubuntu are quite modest. You only need about 512 megabytes of memory. You can try it, like I said before, with the live environment, either with a DVD or USB drive. And you only need about 7.5 gigs of free space on your hard drive to try it out. So with that, you can get a system up and running on some pretty old hardware using, free and open source software. And the packages that are installed with this will probably be slightly different from Lubuntu that I mentioned earlier. May have a little bit more powerful and feature-rich pieces of software installed. Xubuntu is a good place to start if you just want to test to see if this is going to work well on your computer. If you're not really sure the specs on your computer, you could always start off with Ubuntu and then try it in a live environment, and then try something a little bit more powerful and see if that works. If it doesn't, then Ubuntu is your choice. But you can always just plug it in, try it. If it works, great, and if not, you kind of know where you stand as far as what your computer can handle. Ubuntu will work on most computers, whether they are super high spec or low spec as well. And as mentioned earlier, Lubuntu is for basically very low spec computers, or just if you're looking for something to take up barely any resources whatsoever. Next up is one of my favorite projects. I talk about it a lot, and this project is one of these projects are all under development, but this next project, Ubuntu Mate, is basically uses the Mate desktop and is under heavy development all the time. They are making some really nice changes to the Mate desktop. Again, it's a lightweight desktop. It's meant to run on all sorts of different types of hardware. And it is one of the things that I recommend anyone to start out with if they're getting into Linux. I usually recommend a couple of different things, and Ubuntu Mate is one that always comes up first. It runs very well on Raspberry Pis, and Pis are very low spec to begin with. And you have there's a wonderful software center. The other two that I mentioned also have software centers, but the Ubuntu Mate welcome screen is a great addition to help anybody who is getting into Linux for the first time, to learn about all the resources that they have to get help and support. So I have a lot of high respect for Ubuntu Mate. Don't have enough good things to say. I tried it recently in a beta form, and the 1804 edition was looking very nice. And some of their goals is to make it accessible to everybody, whether it's a language barrier or a physical barrier. They want to increase the adoption of using Ubuntu and the Mate desktop. They try to keep it as familiar as possible. So if you've used other Ubuntu distributions, the theme and the artwork is all very similar. So that goes along with basically the Ubuntu families and flavors in general. One of the benefits of being sort of officially blessed by Canonical, the company that makes Ubuntu, is that they get all the resources for testing like Ubuntu would have, and sort of works out all the bugs to allow them to create the distro that they want and sort of tweak it in their own ways to make it a little bit different. So Mate is way up there on my list as far as something to try, and all of these different flavors have their own websites. You can download the ISOs for your computer. Ubuntu itself isn't producing a 32-bit ISO anymore. It's all 64-bit. I believe some of the other flavors are still making 32-bit ISOs as well. So the minimum requirements for the Mate desktop, basically 1 gigabyte of RAM, 9 gigabytes of hard disk space, and basically a Pentium M 1.0 gigahertz processor. They recommend higher specs than that, but most computers in the last 10 years have at least one gigabyte of RAM and 9 gigabytes of hard drive space. So it pretty much can run on just about anything, and Mate is a really great choice. The next official flavor I am not all that familiar with. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. This is the Ubuntu Kylin project is a project that is tuned to the needs of Chinese users. It's meant to be a thoughtful and elegant experience for anyone speaking Chinese in just a great out-of-the-box experience. I have not tried it before, but just looking at some of the screenshots, it's very beautiful looking, and that's not something that we would use, in particular most of the time. I don't speak Chinese, or I don't speak Mandarin, or any of the other languages there. But I just think that it's really neat, and it's a great idea to offer Ubuntu to anybody. Ubuntu basically means, I believe, for humanity or something like that. So why not let everybody use it, which is kind of great. I won't spend a whole lot of time on that. Next up, another favorite project of mine that I have tried and ran for years is Ubuntu Studio. If you are a content creator, multimedia content creator, whether it be audio, video, graphic design, I think Ubuntu Studio would be a great place for you to start, because all of the free video editors, audio editors, graphics design tools are all configured in one Linux distribution. You don't even have to go download them. They're already available. And it's all free to use. So if you're interested in creating content, that would be a great place to start. Your mileage will vary depending on what computer you installed on. If you install it on a very powerful tool or powerful box, you are going to get a great. You're going to create yourself a great resource. And what I found very interesting is that the 18.04 version of Ubuntu Studio is not a long-term support release, because there are going to be major changes happening with Ubuntu Studio over the next couple of years. They're going to be changing default desktop environment, which is, I think, a great idea. I believe they're using XFCE right now. I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've used them. I think they're beginning to look at Mate and other desktop and creating other desktop environments geared towards whatever that user wants. So I think Ubuntu Studio has some great things happening over the next few years. Even though it's not a long-term support, I would still recommend you try it if you are looking for some really powerful tools that are all configured. My dream Linux distribution would be if Ubuntu Studio were to sort of merge with Skywave Linux, and so you'd have all of the multimedia tools for audio, video, graphic design, photography, all those things, and then on top of that, all the resources available for ham radio operators, and in general. I think that would be so awesome to have everything put together, and I believe I've said that before on the podcast, that I would love those two projects to kind of work with each other, and who knows if that'll happen, but I think that would be a great addition to Ubuntu Studio. I think it would also benefit the Skywave Linux distribution as well, because not too many people know about Skywave, and tends to be some hardware issues with Skywave Linux. Ubuntu Studio, not so much. So if they work together, I think it would be pretty awesome to see that all put together. Now, I know that's a sort of niche hobby, ham radio stuff, but I think it goes along hand in hand. Next up is one of the newer flavors. A while back I tried Solus OS, and with Solus you get the Budgie desktop, and the Budgie desktop is actually really slick looking, really nice looking, and it's much different than anything else that's out there. And I'm so glad that there is now a official version of Ubuntu with the Budgie desktop. It is basically brand new. It's been around a little while. Meant to be fully functional out of the box. Includes the best available Linux applications that are out there. You have backed by the Debian and the Ubuntu repositories. That's where it differs from Solus, and you can tailor pick the way your desktop works, and the desktop environment is very low resources. Everything is pre-configured. It looks just beautiful, and it's meant to be fully featured. And you get in, same thing with all the other Ubuntu flavors or Linux in general. You get built-in security, really powerful applications. You can do gaming on it. You can migrate very easily from other accounts. You can connect all of your other accounts, download your favorite apps, and make it your own. It's what's great about Linux is everything is community based too. So if you go with one of these flavors, you can get help and support very quickly, very easily, because if you've had an issue, chances are more other people have had that same issue as well. So far we've talked about Lubuntu, we've talked about Xubuntu, Ubuntu Kylin, Ubuntu Studio, Ubuntu Mate, Ubuntu Budgie. There's one more flavor that I want to talk about. Now, this one in particular, I have been testing for the last few, probably about a week now. Kubuntu is something that has been on my radar for a while. The idea of a KDE desktop has always been appealing to me. When I have tried KDE in the past, it's always been really super resource heavy. It's always looked great, but it was always resource heavy. And honestly, a little buggy from time to time when I needed to do things with audio interfaces, that type of thing. And I've been hearing a lot of great things about this latest release of Ubuntu 18.04, and especially KDE Plasma 5, the desktop environment. So I decided to spin it up in a virtual machine just to see what it was all about. And I have to say, looking at KDE Plasma, I looked at it before when KDE Plasma 5 came out, when it first came out, and now we're at 5.12, and this is a long-term support release. And wow, does Ubuntu look great! It really sort of flies in VirtualBox, which I wasn't expecting. The themes are just absolutely beautiful, and this is one of the most exciting projects that they have made such progress over the last 6 to 12 months that I'm really excited about KDE and Ubuntu. It's using newer versions of Qt, and it has all of its own packages involved, all of the KDE packages you would expect, in a much different experience than you would with a GNOME desktop. Very traditional looking menus and desktop environment all around. The tools just seem to be plentiful in KDE and Ubuntu 18.04. Lots of great software to check out. I haven't used KDE very much. I have in the past experimented on and off with it, but I have not been able to stick with it. I always go back to GNOME. That's where I'm most comfortable. So I miss out on a lot of the KDE software, and my mind is sort of changing as time goes on. The biggest change with Ubuntu is that it has switched its default theme, and they are now offering a minimum install option, which a lot of the Ubuntu flavors are now offering. Basically, you install the operating system, you get a web browser and a couple other things, and then you can build the system yourself. I cannot stress how cool that is. If you don't want all the software installed, it makes for a really fresh system. You can put what you want on it. And now that option is available on install with all of these flavors. So out of all of the flavors right now, I'm most excited about Ubuntu 18.04. I want to test it more in the future, and maybe it has at least a partition waiting for it on some of my devices. I don't know if I would run it as my everyday driver at this point. In fact, I haven't been on Ubuntu in years. I use a different Linux distribution, but some of these things that are happening, I always used to get excited about just the Ubuntu release in general every 6 months. It's like having Christmas every 6 months, and having something new and fun to play with. Now I'm getting to the point where I'm pretty excited about all of these flavors that are doing lots of really great things every 6 months. And one of the things that I noticed is that some of these older official flavors are no longer supported. One was a project called Edubuntu, which was a way to get Ubuntu into schools, and Mythbuntu. Both seem to have, they're no longer official flavors. checking out their website. They haven't been updated in a while, so those projects may have changed course or are doing doing different things at this point in time. I haven't had a chance to read up on those as of yet, but they're no longer official flavors. And also Ubuntu GNOME, which was created when the community didn't like the Unity desktop that came by default with Ubuntu. Now that Ubuntu is running with GNOME Desktop, that project has ceased to exist. And if you are running Ubuntu GNOME and you want to upgrade to 18.04, you will upgrade to just the Ubuntu proper, and you shouldn't have any issues from what I have read. So that's cool how they have integrated that. And so if you're running Ubuntu GNOME before, you're just going to be running straight Ubuntu now when you upgrade. I thought that was really well thought out way to do things. And if you liked the Unity desktop, which I actually kind of liked it a little bit, there was things I really liked about the original Unity desktop. There are ways you can install Unity. Unity is now a community program, and they are continuing development on the Unity desktop. So Unity hasn't gone away. If you were used to that, the way Ubuntu used to look, then there's still ways you can keep running that. Again, your mileage might vary with all of that. So it was kind of fun to do a refresher course on all the official Ubuntu flavors, because they have changed over the last few years. The more that I do this, the more that I podcast, the more that I understand what it is that I want in a system. It's fun to see Linux change so quickly. It's fun to see all these projects working on different things. And if you've never tried Linux before, I encourage you to try it out. With any operating system, there are pluses and minuses. There are great things. There are stressful things. Linux is just fun to use if you're looking for something that's free, and Linux is fun to use if you're looking for software. What got me into Linux is I was tired of paying for software. I was tired of dishing out hundreds of dollars for things. When I know that there was software that was available legally for free, and now when I have a project, the first thing that I do is try to figure out if there's a way that I can do it in Linux. And if I can, that's the way that I go, 90% of the time. But again, there's certain tools and things that I use on other operating systems that I can't step away from. So again, it goes back to that right tool for the job type of thing. If you have questions on trying Linux for the first time, you can contact me. Just go to my website, MrpTechReviews.com, hit the contact form, which is working now. For some reason, it wasn't before. That contact form will send a message to me, and I will get back to you and help you out to the best that I can. And I can give you recommendations based on your specs on your computer. I can help you out with the install process, kind of get you going with that as well. So that's it for the official Ubuntu flavor walkthrough. Coming up in the next few weeks, I'm going to get a couple of friends of mine on the show and hear some of the projects that they're working on, some of the tech stuff that they're doing. I've got a couple of friends who I think you all will enjoy hearing from. And the whole point of that is I want to start every once in a while getting an interview on the show, making the show a little bit more appealing so you're not hearing just my voice from week after week, and just hearing thoughts on other people in general. I don't know how it's going to go. We'll treat this as an experiment, and we'll see where it goes, and hopefully it becomes successful. So that's the idea here. If you'd like to support this show, go to my website, MrpTechReviews.com. There are all sorts of ways you can support financially, even things like not giving financially directly to me, but you can use the Amazon affiliate. You can hit the donate button. I do have a Patreon page. Whatever way suits you best, we'd love to have some support from this show. And you can also go to podnuts.com and check out all the great shows over there. Support their page as well, because without them, there'd be no MrpTech podcast. So very grateful for them as well. That's going to do it for this show, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.